we love to have a chat to Leith Van Onselen, Chief Economist at the MB Fund, one of the co-founders of macrobusiness.com.au. It's the common sense place to go to get your financial or economic news, macrobusiness.com.au. And Mr. Van Onselen of the Leith variety is on the line. How are you, my friend?
Good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Pretty good. You don't get a long weekend this weekend, is that right, in Victoria?
No, mate, we had one last week with the AFL Grand Final. So, look, to be honest with you, at Macro Business, because we're a national website, we only get the national long weekends anyway. So, it doesn't really impact me anyway.
Very good. So let's start with shrinkflation. In fact, I might just play a little audio here. This was featured through the week on Chris Kenny's show on Sky News, and of course, the Prime Minister's social media postings. Have a listen.
You will have seen it. A product comes out in new packaging. It's the same price as before, but the box feels a little bit lighter. It's called shrinkflation, and it's a trick supermarkets and food retailers use to charge you more when you're getting less.
Wow, thanks for that. Not like the first time we've ever heard about it, but he's a Prime Minister who cares, so we should say, go get 'em, Albo. What do you say about shrinkflation and the Prime Minister?
Well, Luke, they often say politics is the art of distraction. So here we go. We got the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese now is, targeting shrinkflation as his latest distraction from everything else that's going on. And, he's promising to regulate the supermarkets more strongly so that your chip packet remains at 300 grams instead of 285 grams, et cetera, et cetera. Big deal. I will add, though, that, whenever you go to the supermarket, there is unit pricing there. So it tells you the price per 100 grams. So I don't really know what he's on about there. But my view on it, Luke, is that it'd be nice if the Prime Minister applied the same pressure to the housing market because, for 20-odd years, or really the last 20 years has been terrible. Australians have been forced to pay much more to live in smaller accommodation. So we've seen massive shrinkflation in the housing market. And classic example is in Sydney. But it applies to all the capital cities. You've seen your outer suburban lot sizes shrink in size, but as the prices have kept rising, you've seen people being shoved into smaller and smaller shoebox apartments. We've seen the New South Wales Productivity and Equality Commission last month say that, we should get rid of minimum apartment sizes, we should build higher towers, have fewer car spaces, less storage, less natural light, all this sort of thing in order to solve the housing crisis. Well, I'd argue that there is rampant shrinkflation in housing, lower living standards, but the Prime Minister is, curiously quiet on that one, Luke. And I'll tell you why he's quiet. He's quiet because the shrinkflation in housing that we're all experiencing, i.e. paying more to get less, is state-sponsored through the government's huge immigration program, which is basically funneling more and more people in our cities. They're growing like science experiments. And the end result of that is we're all forced to live in smaller and more expensive housing, often worse located, poorer quality. Second half of last decade, Sydney, Melbourne, to a less extent Brisbane, saw massive apartment construction that ended up being very poor quality. Flammable cladding, leaky balconies, structural defects, all these sorts of things. Why is the Prime Minister quiet on that one? I'd argue that housing shrinkflation is a 1,000 times worse problem than grocery shrinkflation. But of course, we will never see a politician, rally against that sort of thing because it's state-sponsored. Yeah,
that's such a good point. Actually, I was talking to Chris Kenny about that very thing a little earlier on the show today. Chris from the Oz and from Sky News, and it appears that Sleepy Joe or someone within the left of American politics did a similar thing, a video about, I think it was a cost of chips about a year ago. And look, I think the Prime Minister is so poorly advised by, if it's his media team or, his bunch of advisors or whoever the hell is doing this, that they just, what they do in America, let's do that. And that's what we've got this week. We've got a social media posting about the size of, chocolate bars and cereals. And we know this stuff goes on. And you're right, unit price is there. That's what I look at when I buy stuff. I guess other people do whatever they use when they work out if something's cheap or not. Always MIA on the big things. No real hard line about these appalling protests planned for Monday. and nothing to say about the target of dwellings that is going to be spectacularly missed, and perhaps we go there next, mate, because, and I remember you talking about this a while ago, the idea that we could find 1.2 million dwellings in 5 years, it's a nice dream to have, but the government seemingly doing nothing towards making it even slightly possible to get there.
Yeah, look, this has got to be the biggest pipe dream going around. So the government said we're going to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years. That's 20,000 homes a month for 5 consecutive years. We've never built that level of homes before. The previous record is about 1,050,000 over 5 years. And, you know, surprise, surprise, as keeps happening every single month, Luke, we got some dwelling approvals data from the ABS for August, which showed that in trend terms, that gets rid of all your monthly volatility. We only approved 14,300 dwellings in August, which to me, I don't know about you, Luke, but 14,300 is a fair bit less than 20,000.
Yes.
It's actually nearly 30% less.
Yes.
So we're not even close to the, Albo's target. And over the year to August, we only improved 166,200, which is 73,800 or 31% below the 240,000 annual run rate that's required to meet the target. So yet again, the housing crisis continues to worsen. Albo, using this art of distraction, came out with this great big, number that we're going to build magically without any actual plan to do it, not recognising that it's actually the private sector that builds all this stuff. And we've just had 40% cost inflation over the pandemic. We've got, shortage of builders. They're all competing with state government, big build infrastructure projects, all the usual stuff I always talk about. And, look, I mean, the ultimate solution to this, if you want to solve the housing crisis, we've got to lower immigration. It's as simple as that. You can't be running such huge numbers of, adding to demand so strongly every single year and then expect to build enough homes for them. We haven't done it for 20 years. And what's to say we're going to do it over the next 39 years when Australia's projected to grow by 13 million? That's adding another Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane in 30 years. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
So that is the solution. But unfortunately, Albo and his cronies and the, other politicians, they always say it's a supply problem and really it's an excessive demand problem.
Yeah. Well, they're addicted to the Ponzi scheme, aren't they? More people, more spenders, more taxpayers. Look at us. The economy's growing. And around the world, look at us. We're on fire here. And it's all just that population-driven growth, which does nothing but rip off the rest of us. You've been, and I think this is interesting, you've been pointed here, the coalition and the government have poured fuel on the housing bonfire. Now, we need to know about this stuff. Tell me what the coalition's up to.
Yeah, so Coalition and Labor have both, got two policies that are going to make housing affordability worse, but they're actually dressed up as housing affordability policies. So the Coalition wants to strip the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority of some of its powers to regulate mortgage lending. They also want to, overhaul responsible lending rules, which basically would make it a lot easier to lend credit to marginal borrowers. Now, I'll just add that the number one recommendation of the 2019 Hayne Banking Royal Commission, which is when, the banks were doing all this dodgy stuff, was to keep responsible lending rules, and it was to not water down lending standards. So the coalition wants to basically lower lending standards so you can lend more to, and they say it's because first home buyers are being shut out, is their argument, which is true. Home buyers are being shut out. And their solution is to basically make it easier to lend more to them, which will then make it easy to get in the housing market. The problem with it is it's going to push up prices, which is what it always does. If you add more credit into the system, into a supply-constrained system, you're going to have higher prices. Now, for Labor's part, Labor wants to basically bring in shared equity mortgages, which is basically where the government, owns half the house, you own half the house, and it lets you basically...
Oh, geez, I don't like that. Yeah. Is that sensible in your mind in any way, shape or form?
No, it's not. Well, I mean, it's just going to inflate prices because you're going to basically have people suddenly being able to pay more for a house.
Exactly.
Because it costs less up front.
Yeah.
And it's going to drive up house prices. Now,
and do you go Harvey's? If something happens to the plumbing, do you go Harvey's? Do you go to Albo? Albo, I need $400 for a new S-bend?
Yeah, I know. Well, sorry, I was wrong.
Mate.
It's not 50%, it's 40%. But
right.
That the government own. But, you get my point. So
yes.
all these policies, we've seen them for the last 20 years with first home buyer grants. Anytime they try and do a fake affordability measure, through the demand side measures like this, it just ends up adding to house prices and actually self-defeating, because you end up with higher house prices and often higher levels of household debt. Now, ultimately, as I keep saying, the best solution to this is to, number one, lower immigration. The reason why immigration is so bad for first home buyers is, and I'm not against immigration, I'm just against excessive levels of immigration, which is basically what we've had for 20 years.
Yeah.
The reason why it's so bad is housing affordability is a two-factor issue. It's not just prices, it's also rents as well. And when you run a really high immigration program, you push up rents, which makes it harder for a first home buyer to save for a deposit, which that's the first cross, so it makes it harder. And then obviously it also pushes up prices. So then it pushes house prices further out of reach. So running an excessive immigration program is actually the worst thing you can do for the first home buyers, because you make it more expensive to rent and then you make prices more expensive. So it's a double whammy. And so the number one solution is to lower immigration to a sensible level that's below the nation's ability to build houses and infrastructure. Pretty obvious stuff. But of course, you'll never see a government, you never see the federal government, or Labor, I should say, proposing this. At least the coalition does have a policy to reduce immigration by a reasonable amount heading into the next election. So in that respect, I'd say the coalition's housing policy is better, even though it's not a housing policy, it's an immigration policy.
Yeah, gotcha.
But it obviously flows into housing. And another thing the government should do is obviously tax reform. So we've got a ridiculous situation in Australia whereby we are one of the most reliant economies in the world on personal income taxes. They're growing at a massive rate. They're projected to keep growing. We're basically lumping a smaller share of workers in the economy, because we've got an aging population, with higher and higher taxes. And that obviously is bad for first home buyers as well, because they're trying to save for a house while they're getting taxed more and more. So the solution is to do tax reform to remove the burden from workers and shift it across the economy and, consumption, resources, all those sorts of things. And in exchange for that, you could actually lower some investor tax breaks for housing. So that first home buyers don't have to compete as aggressively against investors. So those are the sorts of things the government should be doing. But instead, in the case of the coalition, they want to loosen credit, and Labor wants to do shared equity. Both of those will push up prices, but at least the coalition does have a lower immigration platform.
Now, next week, my first question will be, what should tax reform look like in Australia? Would it be okay for me to do that next week? Excellent.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's have that conversation.
No worries, mate.
Good on you, mate. Great to hear your voice. Look after yourself. I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, cheers, Luke. Speak to you later.
You beauty. Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au.